The following is the story of Carson Lee, a United States military veteran who served in the war in Afghanistan. He gets wounded, loses part of his leg, returns home, and wins a Senate seat in the state of Alaska. 11 years later, his second term is almost running down to the end, and he decides not to run for a third term. He is disillusioned with the system, with the direction of the nation, with the whole political machine in general. He set out to do certain things for the VA, correct benefits for the military, and a whole list of other things. He realizes that he's gone as far as he can in the Senate, and the jumping off point for the story is him announcing that he is going to leave the Senate and pursue a career in the private sector, along with his friend and brothers in arms, Paul Connor. They serve together, and Paul is his trusted aide and security chief throughout his Senate career, and the story takes off from that point. The story as of yet is untitled. I am reaching out to the people here on Patreon. If anybody has any ideas for titles, I'd love to entertain them. Thank you all for following along. Thank you all for subscribing and supporting my work here. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you enjoy this new story. God bless you. Chapter 1, Untitled. Untitled, Chapter 1. Carson Lee waved to the cheering crowd one last time before stepping away from the podium. As he walked off stage, he turned and threw both hands straight up into the air, displaying the peace sign, and screaming to the crowd, "We are America!" That catchphrase had been his slogan during his time in office. His second term as the junior Republican senator from the state of Alaska was 10 months short of its completion. He walked down the steps leading away from the platform and past the crowd of staffers and reporters gathered backstage. The reporters fired questions at him as he walked past them hurriedly. The assembly of staffers either smiled, nodded their approval, or just cheered as the senator continued along toward the waiting GMC Yukon. The driver was standing outside with the rear door open. As Carson entered the rear of the Yukon, he closed the door after him and took his seat behind the wheel. The senator lowered the privacy glass, which separated the front from the back seats. "Hey, Paul, can you take me home?" The driver nodded and smiled. "Yes, sir, Senator. Home it is." He put the Yukon into drive and sped away, headed up into the mountains of southeastern Alaska. The driver glanced into the rearview mirror to see the senator just looking out his side window as they ascended toward the mountains. "Sir, it seems as though everything went well today, if you don't mind me saying so." Carson looked up at his driver and friend. "Yes, it went well, Paul. Thanks. Oh, and I got your card. Tell Katie I said thanks." He smiled, and Paul nodded back at him. Carson Lee had just announced to the nation that he would not be seeking another term in the Senate, that when his current term ended, he would be leaving office. Paul realized that he, too, would be out of a job come November. Paul served in Afghanistan with Carson, and when he decided to run for Senate, there was nobody he trusted more than Paul Connor. The two had discussed things before Carson announced he would be running for his first term 11 years ago. Paul had no political experience and little knowledge, and even less political ambition of his own. However, Carson knew the importance of having someone he trusted beside him in the world of national politics, a world that he himself knew little about at the time. Paul had been with the campaign from day one, and after Carson won the election, he was given a position as an aide and was put in charge of the senator's personal security detail. Now, with 2 weeks left to the holiday break, Carson was planning to do some steelhead fishing and think about what might lie ahead for him after next November. He just wanted to take some time to decompress before returning to Washington to finish the work he needed to accomplish before his term ended. As the two sat quietly during the long ride, contemplating their futures and meandering up the curving mountain roads, the silence ended abruptly. A black Sikorsky S-76D chopper with the United States Senate insignia flew by overhead. Carson looked up to see Paul looking at him in the mirror. "It can't be," Carson commented. "Can it?" "I think it is, sir," said Paul. "What else would McAdams be doing out here?" Joel McAdams was the current president pro temp of the Senate and the Republican leadership. Carson sighed. "I just announced not 2 hours ago. I figured I'd receive a phone call at some point, but this is insane." "Well, we knew he was touring military bases during break," Paul said. "He's running on a platform of increasing military spending, and with Eielson slated for possible closure, he was planning to visit to reassure the command there that he was doing everything he could to keep it open. The bases are a big employer out here, and he's after the votes. I think he was at Elmendorf today, from Eielson yesterday. It's only 45 minutes by chopper. Maybe he figured he'd just drop in to talk in person," Paul commented. He couldn't help but smile, no matter how hard he tried not to. Carson shook his head. "Seems like you're enjoying this," he quipped. Paul, still smiling, said, "Maybe a little. Sorry, boss." Carson looked back out the window. "No matter. We knew it was coming. Might as well get it over with. So much for fishing." Paul Connor turned onto the gravel drive that wound up through the large stand of pine trees. He pulled the Yukon up in front of the small cottage that sat nestled in the forest. He got out and went to open the rear door for the senator to exit the vehicle. By the time Paul got out, the rear door was open and Carson Lee was letting himself out of the back of the SUV. The modest home had been in Carson's family for decades. His grandfather built it by hand after coming to this then remote part of Alaska. It encompassed 27 acres that sat on a river. Just up the hill from the house was a small barn. The lot outside the barn was barely big enough for Joel McAdams' pilot to land the Sikorsky. As Carson and Paul walked up the steps toward the house, they noticed McAdams sitting on the porch in a wooden rocker, his security detail standing between him and the senator. As Carson ascended the steps to address McAdams, the bodyguard stepped to the side. "Sir, I thought that looked like your chopper. To what do I owe this distinct pleasure?" Carson extended his hand to the majority leader. McAdams declined to shake Carson's hand, pushing past him towards the door. "Senator Lee, can we expend with the pleasantries? It's freezing out here. Let's go inside where it's warm. Why would anyone want to live in this God-forsaken place?" he grumbled as he looked around, waiting for Paul to unlock the door. Carson replied, "Actually, sir, it's a beautiful, sunny 39-degree day." He paused and looked around at the wilderness just off the porch. "And God has not forsaken this place. Quite the opposite, in fact." Carson Lee loved the outdoors. He loved the wilderness. He loved spending time there, and he loved this place that he called home. In fact, he would rather be here than anywhere else. He dreaded going back to D.C. He hated the craziness of the city. He turned and followed the senator inside, leaving the two bodyguards standing on the porch holding vigil. "Yes, well, I suppose it's a matter of perspective," said the senior senator. "Give me the penthouse suite at the Hyatt House in D.C. any day," he scoffed. Carson looked over at Paul and rolled his eyes. "Well, sir, what brings you all the way out here?" he asked as Paul put a kettle on the stove for tea. McAdams looked over at Paul and ordered, "Do you have any decent whiskey?" Paul looked at Carson, who replied, No, I'm sorry, sir, we don't. The only alcohol I have here is a couple of bottles of homemade wine left over from last year. It's my one vice. I enjoy a glass with dinner from time to time." McAdams waved his hand in dismissal. Never mind, never mind. This isn't a social call anyway. What on earth was that little stunt you pulled today?" Carson answered, "Sir?" "Don't sir me," McAdams said. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Announcing you're not running next term? What in the blazes is that all about? Of course you're running. Nobody quits after 2 terms. What's the matter with you, son? Is there some skeleton hidden in your closet that's about to break out? Just tell me what it is. I can spin anything to play it in your favor. We just have to get ahead of it. It's all optics, you know that." Carson looked down at the floor and let out a heavy sigh. Then he gave a half chuckle. "Yes, sir, I do know that. There's no skeleton." He looked up, making eye contact with McAdams. "I think it's interesting that you went there directly. Why does my wanting to quit being in this circus automatically mean scandal?" Although, truth be told, Carson wasn't really surprised by McAdams' reaction. He had been playing this game long enough to know how it worked. "I'm not running for another term. That's it, no scandal. I just had enough. I set out to accomplish certain things, and I believe I've gone as far here as I can. I'm going to continue to pursue my ambitions in the private sector." Carson said it very matter-of-factly, but he himself wasn't sure what form that continuance would take. But he was sure that in this system of corruption and cronyism, he had gone as far as an honest man could. McAdams scoffed. "The private sector? Son, you're just beginning to hit your stride here. In a few years you'll be sitting pretty. Do you realize how much a United States Senator can be worth? You can transfer your political capital into real capital exponentially. Do you realize if you walk away, you're potentially leaving millions of dollars on the table, son? If you have things you want to get pushed through, I can help you. You gotta be patient. Your time's coming, I promise you that. Why don't you put out a press release retracting your statement about not seeking another term? You and I and the wives will fly out to my ranch in New Mexico. We host a group of select senators along with some of the country's most influential power brokers every year for a long weekend. You'll love it, and the wives have a blast. We host a spa weekend for them there, while the men network. I'll introduce you around." "Well, thank you, sir, but my mind really is made up. I've enjoyed my time serving my country, but it's time for me to go." McAdams interrupted. "Don't be a fool. It isn't just about you. We have controlling interest in the Senate right now. The Democrats took the House last midterms, and we have a precarious balance right now. A balance we can't afford to disrupt." McAdams paused and let out a long sigh. "I'll tell you what, Lee, just take a week or so to sit on it. I really wish you hadn't announced without talking to me first. But it's okay. We can reverse it, no problem. Just promise me you'll think about it." Carson grimaced a little and said, "I will think about it, sir. I have thought about it. My mind really is made up."